All right, AP World Historians. Let's dive into one of the most complex and fascinating topics in the entire course. Unit 8, Topic 6. What happens after the flags of independence are raised? We're talking about state building in the post-colonial era. So, the colonizers have left, the celebrations have ended, and now the real work begins. How do you build a stable, prosperous nation from the ground up, especially when the old rulers left behind a tangled mess? First, let's talk about the political landscape. Newly independent states in Asia and Africa had some big choices to make. Many leaders like Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana or Sukarno in Indonesia initially championed democracy. They held elections, wrote constitutions, and tried to create governments that represented the people. But it wasn't easy. Why? Well, think about the borders. The European powers had drawn them without any regard for the ethnic, religious, or linguistic groups living there. Suddenly, people who were historic rivals were expected to be part of the same country. This often led to intense internal conflicts and made national unity a huge challenge. Because of this instability and the immense pressure to develop quickly, some states turned away from multi-party democracy. They moved towards one-party rule or even military dictatorships. Leaders argued that a strong, centralized government was necessary to maintain order and direct economic growth. For example, in many parts of Africa and the Middle East, military leaders who came to power through coups, like Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, promised to end corruption and restore national pride. They often presented themselves as the only ones who could hold the fragile new nation together. This shift highlights a major theme: the struggle between maintaining democratic ideals and the practical challenges of governing a diverse and often divided post-colonial state. Now, let's switch gears to the economy. Political freedom didn't automatically mean economic freedom. Many new nations were still caught in the web of the global capitalist system, often dependent on their former colonizers. They continued to export raw materials like cocoa, coffee, or minerals at low prices, while importing expensive manufactured goods. This created a cycle of dependency that was hard to break. So what did they do? Some countries embraced socialist principles. They thought, if capitalism is the system that exploited us, let's try something different. Leaders like Julius Nyerere in Tanzania implemented policies of collectivization and state control over the economy. His Ujima policy, which means familyhood in Swahili, aimed to create self-sufficient socialist villages. The goal was noble economic equality and independence. However, the results were often mixed. These state-controlled economies sometimes struggled with inefficiency and a lack of innovation, leading to economic stagnation. Let's look at a few case studies to see these ideas in action. Take India, the world's largest democracy. After independence in 1947, leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru implemented a mixed economy. The government controlled major industries like steel and transportation, but also allowed for a private sector. This was a form of economic nationalism, trying to guide development from within. They focused on policies like the Green Revolution to boost agricultural output and feed their massive population. While India faced and still faces immense challenges, its commitment to democracy and a mixed economic model provides a fascinating contrast to other post-colonial paths. Now, consider a different path in Southeast Asia. In Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, came to power in 1975 after a brutal civil war. They took the idea of a self-sufficient, agrarian socialist state to a horrifying extreme. They forced the entire population out of the cities to work in collective farms, abolished money and private property, and sought to create a completely new society from year zero. The result was a genocide that killed nearly a quarter of the country's population. This is a tragic and extreme example of how the quest for a new national identity and economic system could go terribly wrong. Another key example is Israel. The creation of the State of Israel in 1948 was a unique case of state building, but it led to immediate conflict with its Arab neighbors. Wars in 1948, 1967, and 1973 shaped the nation's identity, politics, and borders. For Palestinians, the creation of Israel led to displacement and the loss of their land, a conflict that continues to this day. Israel developed a strong, technologically advanced economy and a vibrant, if contentious, democracy, but its path was defined by persistent regional conflict. Meanwhile, back in Africa, the legacy of colonial rule continued to play out. In many places, the transition of power was not peaceful. Think about the white minority rule in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, or the apartheid system in South Africa. In these settler colonies, a small European population held all the political and economic power, and the black majority had to fight a long and bitter struggle for freedom. The fight against apartheid, led by figures like Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress, became a global cause. When Mandela was finally freed and became president in 1994, it was a monumental moment in the history of decolonization and state building, showing the world that a peaceful transition to a multiracial democracy was possible. So, what are the big takeaways for your AP exam? First, remember that state building after decolonization was not a single story. Nations took diverse paths: democratic, authoritarian, socialist, capitalist. Second, the legacy of colonialism, especially those arbitrary borders and dependent economies, created massive challenges that these new states had to overcome. Third, leaders and governments played a huge role. Figures like Nkrumah, Nehru, Nyerere, and Mandela shaped their nation's destinies through their choices and policies. And finally, many of these newly independent states tried to forge their own way in the Cold War. They didn't want to be puppets of the United States or the Soviet Union. This led to the creation of the Non-Aligned Movement, an organization of states that chose not to formally align with either superpower. It was a powerful statement of sovereignty, an attempt to create a third way in a bipolar world. As you review, think about these patterns of continuity and change. The continuity is the ongoing economic connection to the global system. The change is the radical political transformation and the different experiments in governing. By comparing and contrasting these different state-building projects from India's democracy to Tanzania's socialism to Cambodia's tragedy, you'll have a solid grasp of this crucial period in modern world history. Thanks for watching. Keep up the great work with your studies and be sure to subscribe for more AP World Review. You've got this.